Hello, man. Welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation Anshe Emet. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Sheikh Day School of Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kolmanovsky, Anshe Chesed, New York City. Just want to say, as we always been saying throughout this year, we're recording this now. It's day 273. This will be during the week of, I don't know, the 280s. We're recording this slightly early for Parasha Hukkat, but we're thinking of the hostages as always, and praying that they be restored from the Sheol. The Sheol, that word has been in my head from the Parsha from uh, Korach, Sheol. But now we are turning
But
to,
we should say why recording it early and wish
and we're
you
recording it early
Mizlat
because
Tova.
I am going to Israel next week. Actually, on Sunday, July the 7th, I'm going to be participating in the Hartman Institute seminar for rabbis. It's going to take place over July 8th to 18th. So we'll record a Parsha talk from Israel as well. I'm looking forward to that, and of course to see members of my family and my granddaughter who live in Israel, and see many people, many friends, uh, and just take in what needs to be taken in during this time. We are Parshat Hukkat. Okay, Hukkat starts with the ritual. We've discussed this in the past, but we have to reacquaint ourselves with the ritual of Paraduma, what is known as the red cow, the red heifer, probably really a brown heifer or rust-colored heifer. This is a purificatory ritual, a ritual that involves preparing this animal, burning entirely, almost in the category of a chatat offering, taking all of its pulverized ashes and mixing it together with many, many gallons of water and making what is technically called in the scholarly literature a detergent. A detergent that will cleanse individuals from their encounter with the dead. It probably actually it may it may have been a detergent because soaps are made from ash and other ingredients. I once looked this up. Ash and fats and all sorts of things that are made into this substance that will cleanse you. But we're not talking about taking a bath with a soap. We're talking about purification from the contact with the dead. So let's go there. Let's go there for a second, if you're ready to go there, which is contact with the dead, and how that contact plays out in the communal life, in the ritual life, and of course in the personal life, and what it means. What's the spiritual dimension of this? And I'm gonna.
So, first of all, as you correctly said, ancient languages don't lock on to modern senses of color, uh, very tightly. It oftentimes seems like, this is true in Hebrew, it's true in English, that a description of a word doesn't necessarily connote the same kind of color that we would think about. And this is para aduma, it's red, and our, academic researchers, people who know the ancient world, will tend to say, as you said, that it's probably brown, and that is certainly correct. It doesn't necessarily mean like some crazy crimson cow. However, I do think that um, the suggestion is that this does stand in for blood. So the redness of the cow, whatever they thought about, a kind of a rust color uh, cow, an auburn color cow, it did connote to them, I think, human blood and death.
So
Uh,
what makes that interesting in part, Jeremy, is that in the Torah and in the biblical religion, blood also has a detergent quality to it, right? It's sprinkled on the curtain separating the Kodesh from
mhm.
the Kodesh HaKodeshim in order to purify it. Not something that we urge our listeners to try at home.
So I think about this in terms of, back in the day when you bought detergent, you used to buy big cartons of detergent, and then somebody along the line, the last 2, 3 decades, invented concentrates. Now you can buy, let's say, a gallon of Tide, and get, 80, 90 loads out of it just in a spot. So it's because it's a highly, highly toxic and concentrated liquid, and designed such so that obviously they can transport it for all the reasons that you would want a concentrate. And this is what I think about in terms of, creating purification substances. They're rare, they're highly, they're difficult to make. So you want to maximize the utility of the animal and the utility of the solution that is made. So we don't have the ratios of water to ash here, but we can imagine that they're quite large ratios because it was a rare event, and it was quite an involved procedure. As if you read through chapter 19 of the Book of Numbers, it's quite a delicate and lengthy procedure with lots and lots of places where it can go wrong. And just to listen, I mean, there is some record in the Mishnah of how many times, how many parot adumot there during the biblical era or the post-biblical era, the temple era, and could you opine for us why they are so infrequent?
So, actually, I think I want to just wonder about that a little bit. I will be happy to read the Mishnah in a moment to suggest, which suggests that there were a grand total of 7 parot adumot
What a coincidence.
through biblical. What a coincidence! Like not a symbolic number at all. But I want to suggest for a moment though, like think about it in a different way. I mean, nowadays people have really rare contacts with dead bodies.
Yeah.
People die in hospitals. Their family is not with them. They are rarely in the room with the dead body. I just last week I had a funeral with somebody, and I explained to the family that there's this, Chevra Kadisha, and that some people would volunteer to wash his mother's body. And he just like sobbed. He said that was just the most generous, kind thing that he could have thought of, that somebody would do that, because nowadays it seems so extremely out of the ordinary. When I do think that in pre-modern times, it must have been, in fact, not at all uncommon that people would, as I'm looking for the pasuk here for a second. It is 1913.
13, yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, kol hanogea bemet, anyone who touches a dead body, kol hanogea bemet benefesh ha'adam, a human corpse, asher yamut, who has died. But that's not the pasuk I'm looking for. Verse 15 talks about when a person dies in a tent, and whoever's in the tent, you are in an enclosed space with the person. Verse 14, Zot haTorah adam ki yamut ba'ohel, kol haba el ha'ohel v'chol asher ba'ohel, whoever enters the tent, whatever items are in the tent, yitma shivat yamim, will be defiled for 7 days. Then verse 16, v'chol asher yiga al pnei hasadeh, whoever touches not in an enclosed space but an open space, b'chal al cherev, somebody who's been stabbed, over mate, or a corpse, over etzem adam, or a human bone, over kever, or you've touched a grave, yitma shivat yamim, you are defiled for 7 days. And I have to think that that was not at all, I mean, it's of course still exceptional in the sense that it was important, impactful, terrifying, whatever, but I don't think it was nearly as rare. I'm quite sure that if I didn't work as a synagogue rabbi and I wasn't a physician, I would see dead bodies much, 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 much more infrequently. And I think that ancient people saw them much, much, much more frequently. So it is true, as you said, that the rabbinic tradition holds that this was super rare, that there were 7. I'll scoot over to the Mishnah in chapter 3 of the Mishnah of Parah. It said that the one view is that Moses made a red heifer, and there was not another one until Ezra at the tail end of the biblical period.
Right.
And then there's another set of views that there were 7, but whatever happened between Moses and Ezra was whatever they were. But from Ezra on, there were seven. Ezra on to the end of the entire Second Temple period, which was 400 years or 500 years. There were only seven of them. That does suggest rareness and a spookiness and a whatever. But I gotta think that in reality, lots of people contacted lots of dead bodies on a daily basis and needed some ritual, some rite, some sort of process which was going to bring them back into normal life and help them function.
So
Go ahead, Mary.
a few things might be said here. And the first thing is that one of the curiosities of there only being 7 Parota Dumot is what happened during the exile. Where were the ashes, right? We only had one from Moses to Ezra, and that included the 70 years between the destruction of the first temple and the building of the second temple. They had to, I mean, the theory at least had this ash prepared so that when the second temple was built, it could be utilized again. And it leads me to suspect that this was an ideal case of what should happen with purity or corpse contamination, but that in practice, it may not have worked quite that way. But the other thing I wanted to say, it wasn't that long ago when a lot of people were born at home. And now everyone almost is born in the hospital. And it's the same with death. And I think one of the things that happens, especially for people who, such as you, Jeremy, living in the largest city in the United States, dying at home is much less frequent than it is, say, in rural areas for lots of different reasons, one of them being access to hospitals. And I think that in a world where life cycle events happened at home more frequently than they do now, I would think that almost everyone would come into contact with the dead more than once in their life. And so we're talking about an entire population having to be purified to conform with chapter 19 of Sefer Bamidbar, the book of Numbers.
Well,
And it doesn't seem that the way the ritual is described, that was possible.
let me offer this I guess an explanation or a question, which is we have this parsha coming right after the story of the scouts and the sentence, the verdict that is given against the people, which is that your corpses are going to fall in the desert. Right? This experience is going to be an experience now of total regeneration. That is, the generation that left Egypt will die, and the generation that is born in the desert will now take on and take over. If you do the math, okay, according to the census, so let's say it's 600,000, okay, which is estimated to be 2.5 million. Let's say it's a large number, okay. How many people would from just consulting actuarial tables? Death is going to be a constant experience, okay, and this is something that I think we take for granted, or maybe we're mindful of this. I'm certainly mindful, and Jeremy, I'm sure you're mindful of this as well in the congregational rabbinate. So you are, my shul has about 350 families. Your shul probably much larger. Okay, so we have populations. There are large enough populations. The total population, if you radiate out from each family, maybe 1,200 people. And if you add another orbit, you're into 1,500, 2,000 people. From an actuarial perspective alone, death is going to be once, not once a week, but once in a very short while. Okay, it's we when we go several weeks without an event in the shul, we think we're lucky. Larger shuls, I mean, there's a reason why there are 2 or 3 rabbis in them, and you can corroborate this experience. You're having a funeral or something, on a very frequent basis, probably sometimes as much as once a week, maybe even more. I've had sometimes 3 in a day, which is very unusual. But this will happen, and so any population that has a certain kind of number will incur, shall we say, these experiences. It's just statistically probable.
So listening to you talk may have helped solve one of the problems that I had, that the chapter is addressed to Moses and Aaron, but the main priest who's involved in the ceremony is Aaron's son Eleazar. And so it occurs to me that perhaps, even from the Torah's point of view, this ritual is not going to take place until they got into the land.
Uh-huh.
And that's why Eleazar is the priest, because he's the Kohen Gadol. When they actually enter the land, then the ritual becomes operative. And then that would also render the idea of all the people dying in the desert not relevant to the application of the law.
Well, maybe he has a direct personal interest in it because, and maybe this would enable us to shift a little bit in the focus. We have two deaths reported in this parsha, the death of Miriam and the death of Aaron. And not that we want to focus on that. Leave it to me to bring it down a little bit. Okay,
You want it darker?
I do, but no, I don't. I considering
Inani, my lord.
the fact that the Torah will end on choose life, the fact that this parsha focuses on the ritual impurity incurred by an individual who is contact with the death, and the personal losses experienced specifically by Moses in the loss of a sibling, sister Miriam, loss of the second sibling, brother Aaron. But these are losses also, of course, to the entire people, because the people experienced, the loss of two of the triumvirate in the team. That had to have had a major effect on the people in terms of just mortality, the thinking about their future, and it's sad. It's sad. We're connected to these people, like them or not, they're part of our lives. And
I think that I think this is right on target. We've talked over these years many times, Elliot, you have particularly driven this home, that Egypt was a cult of death, massive pyramids, massive graves. Judaism wishes instead to be a cult of life. Um, and when Miriam dies, and there's no water, by the way, to our listeners, this it says Miriam dies, and then it says there's no water. This gives rise to the midrash that there was a well that traveled around in consequence of Miriam's righteousness, and when that individual died, the well vanished, and that's why they were waterless. But then it says, "Vayarev ha'amim Moshe," and the people quarreled with Moshe. So it says, "Lu gavanu bigva achenu lifnei Adonai." If only we had perished when our brothers had perished before the Lord. Uh, you have a terrible loss. And there is this kind of, like Freud called this, there's eros, the life drive, and thanatos, the death drive. And that is a part of the human psyche that just says, oh my God, I wish I were dead. Jonah says, when things aren't going his way, I wish I were dead. Rachel, when she's struggling with infertility, says to Jacob, I wish I were dead. And there are moments of, great grief, and people say, I'm going to kill myself. I wish I were dead. Just yesterday, I visited somebody in the hospital who was in great despair and talked about wanting to kill herself. And I think that rituals like the red heifer and a sense of recoverable tahara, like you feel tum'ah, you feel impurity, you feel defilement. But one of the things that I think the biblical religion tries to give people, and of course, rabbinic religion is later. We don't have the same, concepts of impurity and purity that they were in the Bible. But I think that in the Bible, something like the red heifer is, let us pull you back to life, because you might feel like death. You can't get stuck in death. We got to pull you back to life.
Look, I mean, just let me interject with a parenthetical remark, which is back in Leviticus, which was our favorite book this year. All the stuff about skin and diseases and everything. That's all about coming into contact with dead or being close to dead, and the boundary between the living and the dead, and trying to literally resuscitate people who have experienced a quasi death. And so
Totally.
here the people are experiencing, we have the mitzvot, the red heifer, and we have these real time experiences of people with death on a communal scale, which is death of a leader, which is
By the way, I think not to get too much into current events, but this is a eternal kind of thing when anybody comes into contact with death at any age or in any circumstance. But when the Torah says anybody who has touched somebody who's been murdered or somebody who's died of natural causes or a bone or a grave, gotta feel like Am Yisrael this year,
Absolutely.
we are all those people. We are all those people, and we need some pulling back into life.
It's so interesting you mention it because we are using this language in this year. It's almost as if, and it's not almost as if, it is a year of Avelut, a year of collective mourning, Avelut for the entire people with such catastrophe and death on such a large scale and back in October. We're still moving through those months as as I said, we marked 270 days, 280. We're in those 8-9 months of this. We're in the last quadrant of a year of mourning where we feel that we're coming out of it, and yet we're so we're still very much consumed by it and aware of it. Certainly not in the same way that people who are directly in the radius of it are, being so far away. But we've been emotionally attached to it and emotionally and spiritually connected to all of this drama. And yeah, so what kinds of rituals do you need to overcome death and mourning? And we have that. And what kind of ritual do you need to be literally cleansed from this? But back to Miriam and what happens afterwards? It's water. We're focused on water. And could you talk just a minute about what God says to Aaron and Moshe, you and Atava Aaron Achicha, B'dibartem el hasela, you talk to the rock, and they talk to the rock. They really give it to that rock, and they don't really talk to the rock in the end. Barry, what do you make of it?
Okay, we talked about this quite a bit, and in the course of the years, because this parsha also came up a lot during camp as well.
Yeah.
What I would like to focus on for a moment is the very last two words of the story of Moses, what we call Moses and the rock, which is Vayikadesh Bam, that he will be sanctified Bam, with them, through them, whatever. It's not clear what the Hebrew actually refers to, as Jacob Milgram makes clear in his commentary. And of course,
This is verse 20, Numbers 20, verse 13, for those of you who are following along in your own books.
And one of the things that's important to keep in mind is that Jacob Milgram can say that this isn't clear, but when you look at the traditional commentaries, they all tell you what it means. And they don't, a lot of times the classical commentators don't say it's not so clear, even though they have the same Hebrew problem that Milgram has, that you have a pronominal reference with no clear antecedent. And what occurred to me when I was looking at the Parsha before we started recording is that the sin of Moses and Aaron here is less about what happened at the rock, but that it got to this event in the first place, meaning that they did not make careful provisions to avoid the people complaining about not having water and wishing that they were dead, and that it's actually a failure of leadership that leads them to be punished. Because as this story makes clear, and it's made even more clear perhaps in the parallel story in Exodus 17, that the place name given to this scene is Mei Merivah. These are the waters of
Struggle.
fighting, of contest, because of how the people behave towards God. And yet the people in this story are not punished. When whatever happens to the rock happens, the water flows copiously, right? You would not know from the results that Moses and Aaron did anything wrong. The only way that you know they did something wrong is because God says, you're not getting into the land now. And, it leads us to a consideration of how we evaluate leaders, which is something I think that as Americans is very much on our mind as we get into what we hope will be the final months of the the eternal election season, that leadership, sometimes leaders are judged by what they do, but they're also judged sometimes by what they do not do. And that sometimes they're responsible for the behavior of the people when the people go astray because they might have been able to prevent it in the first place. And I think it's something that's worth thinking about, especially today on the day we celebrate America's birthday with its Declaration of Independence signing.
So we've been critical of Moses in the past, and can you sympathize with Moses here?
I think that's the whole point. Of course, you can sympathize with Moses, but in other words, Moses is not a leader by choice. He wasn't elected, he was chosen by God. And when he said, I'd rather not, God said, okay, that doesn't matter to me. You're the man. And he takes the role. And now he has to fulfill it. And okay, he got frustrated. He got angry. He misspoke. He hit the rock twice. However we want to dress it up, we can all find a way to make Moses's actions more comprehensible, but all of them point to a failure of leadership.
I like this. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
go
like
on.
way of thinking because I think that the approach here within Numbers 20, I mean, Miriam dies, they're in a panic, they've got no more water, and they say this thing, the people who complain say this thing, which is absolutely guaranteed to cause, the divine anger. Why did you make us leave Egypt, this terrible place? You told us this land was going to be great, and it's lo makom zera uteina v'gefen v'rimon. You told us this was going to be this awesome place flowing with milk and honey. It was going to have grain. It was going to have figs. It was going to have grapes. It was going to have pomegranates. And there's not even any water. And so you sort of feel like that is the people's pattern. Last week in Korach, they said, you took us out of the land flowing with milk and honey, meaning Egypt, and brought us into the desert, which stinks. So the people have done something wrong, but in that kind of spiritual narrowness and that scantiness of vision, they couldn't see anything past the nose beyond their face, and they couldn't see anything, besides the physical struggles. And that is Moses' problem. But the story is told here, not emphasizing their failure. It's emphasizing Moses' failure. So I think, Barry, you brought out an interesting kind of instability in this text. The people whine, but it's Moses' fault.
So
And
just
that
to
is, I think, a failure of
make
leadership.
a historical comparison, is Moses here is more like Neville Chamberlain in 1938 when we needed Churchill. Right? Churchill didn't say, things are terrible and they're going to turn better right away. He said, we're in for the long haul, but we're going to make it. And we don't get that sense that this is what Moses said here. I think he, in the sense, he kind of abdicated for reasons that we can all understand because he is a human being like the rest of us. And for a leader, it's not enough. When a leader says, I'm only a human being, they've already lost.
So that's really interesting because, we are in the midst of great conflict in the United States, great conflict in Israel. Arguably, the sometimes leaders are shown to be so human, all too human, and can't rise a little bit to be a little bit superhuman. And in the United States right now, at this particular moment, with a very aged president who has a great line, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. Great line for Joe Biden, but it might not get that job done. We might need you to not just be, hey, I'm human, cut me a break.
Yeah.
Is this a punishment, or is this simply, when Moses is told you're not going to lead the people into the land, maybe that's God asking for his resignation. That is to say, what you have demonstrated here is that you're not capable of that.
No, I would disagree. It's not that he's saying you're not capable of that. It means that, you made a mistake but you are still the leader, and now you have to lead.
And I have to lead.
You
In other
cannot
words,
give up. You're not going to get to your goal, but that doesn't mean, you go to your room and lock the door and play with your toys. You have to step up and finish the job that I chose you to do,
yeah, but
which now is to get you to the east side of the Jordan River,
Jordan. Okay, so
which
he's
we're going to
gone.
get to in a few weeks at the end of Midbar.
Right, but we tend to think that by not taking them over, by being bound by the Jordan, that boundary, there's something of a punishment there, and maybe he's being told
So
your term of office is over.
I've said this before. I think that Moses not getting into the promised land is really ultimately what makes the Torah a great book,
Yes,
because we all die on the east side of the river with a vision, we hope, of the promised land, and we don't know what's going to come next. And at the end of the Torah, everyone who gets that far in the reading, and we read it every year, knows that we can be like Moses. And I think that's actually uplifting. It's not a punishment. The price that you pay for life is that you must die, but it's not a punishment. I may have quoted Heschel recently. At the end of one of his books, he says that for a pious person, it's a privilege to die.
right.
And Moses was privileged at the end, and especially the way the rabbis understand his death as the kiss of God.
Biyado afkid ruchi.
Yeah.
Like that's a verse from Psalm 31, which makes it into our poem Adon Olam. I place my soul into your hand. In Psalm 31, it says
That's
Biyadaka.
bitachon.
So I'm
But
just trying to imagine if you're a kid at Camp Ramah in the Berkshires, and our voices are coming over the loudspeakers at the Bama or anywhere else in the camp right now, with this conversation about death and water and leadership. So we got to give them something to think about for Shabbat. We got
first of
to
all, they should drink a lot of water because
they
you
should
don't want
drink
to
a
be
lot of
dehydrated.
water. They should
Don't be
have
dehydrated.
Right, and they should rest, and they should understand that the Torah is about life, and that it includes all of these different experiences, very powerful experiences, intense experiences, and things that will raise in them, I think, very urgent questions. And you know what? That's the place to do it. That's the place to ask your questions. And you know what? You could also email us or call us, well, or write to us and ask us some questions. We'll address them in a future edition of Parsha Talk. Uh, but anything uplifting to say to them, to our friends at Machaneh Ramah in the Berkshire.
I have one thing because this parsha, because it is very, very heavily, it's the death of a generation. Moses is told to take Aaron up the mountain and to strip him of the garments, and it says, and Moses did as he was commanded. And I read in that space, like the internal struggle. Because if I say Moses did as he was commanded, the Torah narratively is telling you there might have been a question that he might not have, but he did. He found it in himself to confront this loss. So that's intense. But the other thing that I love in this parsha, because it is also about waterlessness and being caught in the dry desert, there's another passage, this little fragment of a mythic song that the people encountered a well and sing to the well. Moses is, I'm scrolling ahead. This is chapter 21, verse 16. And they went from this place and they went to that place. And they went to a place called Be'era. They went to Be'er. We hear Kibbutz Be'eri perhaps in our ears right now. Hi ha-be'er asher amar Adonai leMoshe, and that's the well about which God had said to Moses, Esof et ha'am ve'etna lahem mayim, gather up the whole people, and I will give them water. Az yashir Yisrael et hashira hazot, and then all the people of Israel sang this song, Ali be'er enula, spring up, O well, sing to it. Part of this parsha, it turns on the fact that the water isn't coming. There's no water. There's no water. They're dying of thirst. And Moses beats the rock into pieces. And that's so violent and so harsh. And here there's this moment where you get to sing to the well and the water spurts out. That's just like, at a real religious triumph, song produces enough water. So
Yeah.
I find that really affirming.
So-
or water produces enough song.
Right. What I would go for the most uplifting part of the Parsha is when it's describing Aaron's death. He goes up the mountain, but he does not go alone. He goes with Moses and Aaron. And Moses takes off the priestly vestments from Aaron and puts them on Eleazar, his son, Aaron's son, to demonstrate the continuity. And I think that's a very powerful thing because, the nature of life is it's a passing from one generation to the next, door of a door. And, I'm thinking again, since it is July 4th, one of the great speeches in American history was the night before Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. He said, I've climbed the mountain, I'm paraphrasing, and I may not get there with you, but I've seen the coming of
See the promised land.
Yeah.
I've seen the
I've
promise. I can't remember the exact phrase, but that's a very powerful message, I think,
Into the
that
mountain.
we can climb the mountain.
Yeah.
And that's important when you go up to Mount Ramah.
With that, friends, we want to say Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you to all of our friends. Big shout out to Mitch Mernick and Kol Ramah 102.3. Thank you for listening. And
we wish you a great trip to Eretz Yisrael,
Thank you very
and to
much.
give your children and your
Beautiful.
grandchild a big hug and kiss from us.
Thank you so much. We'll see you next week on the next edition of Parsha Talk. Bye-bye.
Shabbat Shalom.